He had children with his very own grandmother, the most disturbing family scandal ever to emerge from Mississippi. It's a phrase that alone sends chills and creates deep discomfort, yet it represents a dark reality that unfolded within the isolated swamps of Humphreys County during the 1960s. In the summer of 1962, the initial rumors regarding the Caldwell family first started to circulate through the small community of Bellone. The Caldwells, isolated on a swampy property miles from the nearest town, were a rare sight in public, and on the occasions they did appear, they consistently avoided any social interaction. The family matriarch was Margaret Caldwell, a woman of 58 years at that time. Having been widowed for more than 2 decades, Margaret shared her home with her grandson, Elijah, 27, who had come back to the family property after his parents tragically died in a car accident back in 1957. Situated deep within the swamps, the property was a place almost inaccessible to any visitors, enveloped by murky waters and dense vegetation. Whenever the family came into town for supplies, the residents of Bellone couldn't help but notice something was off. They always appeared nervous, constantly looking over their shoulders as if they were hiding something. As Martha Jenkins, the proprietor of the town's sole grocery store at the time, reported years later. The true horror of their situation started to come to light when Margaret gave birth to a child at the local hospital in October of 1962. For a woman nearly 60, the event was extraordinary in itself. But what left the doctors and nurses in a state of shock was Margaret's complete refusal to name the child's father or offer any explanation for how a pregnancy was possible at her age. The physician responsible for the delivery, Dr. Howard Reynolds, instantly noticed that something was wrong with the newborn. The infant displayed significant facial deformities, fused fingers, and an abnormally small cranial size. He documented these findings in his confidential report, a document that would not become public until decades later. Fearing the worst, local authorities launched a discreet investigation. Sheriff James Wilson assigned a young deputy, Robert Thompson, to keep watch on the Caldwell property. We had received reports from neighbors concerning screams and strange behaviors. Verifying the welfare of the children who were supposed to be living there became a necessity, Wilson explained in an interview he gave years later. What Deputy Thompson discovered over the course of his routine visits to the property slowly built a case that would manage to shock even the most seasoned investigators. Margaret was living not just with her grandson Elijah, but also with 3 other children, all of whom displayed deformities similar to the newborn. The older children spoke very little. They had obvious motor difficulties and facial features that suggested serious genetic issues, Thompson recorded in his personal diary, which was discovered after his death in 1998. The full truth only emerged when one of the children, approximately 5 years old, was hospitalized with severe pneumonia in January 1963. While examining the child, the medical team observed signs of neglect and potential genetic problems that were consistent with cases of consanguinity. It was during questioning that Margaret finally broke her long silence. She simply stated that Elijah was the father of every one of the children, reported nurse Susan Parker, who was present for the confession. She said it without a trace of emotion, as casually as if she were talking about the weather. Check to see if you're already subscribed to the channel. If you aren't, subscribe now so you don't miss exclusive revelations concerning the most disturbing family cases in American history, stories you will never see on mainstream media. Your membership in the community that uncovers society's darkest secrets is hereby guaranteed. The revelation from Margaret Caldwell didn't just shake the small community of Bellone, it rattled the entire social services structure of the state of Mississippi. How could such a perverse relationship have remained concealed for so many years? And more critically, how did the authorities permit 4 children to be born from this forbidden union? To grasp the Caldwell case in its entirety, we must return to 1957, the year a 22-year-old Elijah returned to the family property following his parents' death. According to records from the local parish, Elijah had left Bellone years earlier to try and make a life in Memphis, Tennessee, but he never managed to establish himself, largely due to problems adapting socially. Elijah was always a strange, withdrawn boy, commented Reverend Thomas Williams in his testimony to the authorities. When he came back after the death of his parents, he seemed even more isolated from the world. Margaret welcomed him as if he were a small child once more, not a grown man. The Caldwell property, known locally as Devil's Swamp, was practically impossible to access during the rainy seasons. The single dirt road that led to the house would be submerged for months at a time, effectively cutting off its residents from the outside world. This geographical circumstance was critical in allowing the family secret to remain hidden for so long. The Caldwell house was described by social worker Jean Roberts, who was assigned to the case in 1963, as a museum of horrors frozen in time. According to her report, the home had neither electricity nor running water. The walls were adorned with old newspaper clippings and disturbing drawings made by the children. The most shocking aspect was the natural way in which everyone interacted. The children called Margaret Mommy and Elijah Daddy without any indication that they understood the abnormality of their situation, Roberts wrote. Medical examinations conducted on the 4 children, William, 8 years old, Sarah, 7, James, 5, and the newborn, Thomas, revealed the devastating health impact of consanguinity. All of them presented with microcephaly in varying degrees, congenital heart problems, and significant intellectual disability. A geneticist consulted by the authorities, Dr. Lawrence Peterson, explained that the children's conditions were consistent with an accumulation of deleterious recessive genes, a typical result of consanguineous relationships. When individuals who are genetically very close have children together, the probability of congenital defects increases in a dramatic way, he detailed in his report. But the most disturbing dimension of the case came to light when authorities discovered diaries that Margaret had kept since Elijah's return. The writings revealed a mind warped by years of isolation and what was likely an untreated mental illness. Margaret described how she reconquered her grandson, manipulating him emotionally after the traumatic death of his parents. "He is mine now, as he was always meant to be," she had written in an entry from 1958. "We are the last true Caldwells. Preserving our lineage at any cost is our duty." Further investigations revealed that the Caldwells' isolation was not merely geographical, it was also cultural and psychological. Margaret had been raised in an extremely closed community during the time of the Great Depression, a place where marriages between cousins were commonplace due to isolation and poverty. As local historian Dr. Robert Johnson documented in his book, Delta Secrets, The Isolated Communities of Mississippi, certain families within the swampy regions developed their own rules and moral codes, which often stood in conflict with the broader society's laws and norms. These communities existed inside a cultural vacuum, perpetuating practices that dated back generations. In the Caldwell case, we see evidence that Margaret herself was the product of a union between first cousins, a fact that may partly explain her distorted perspective on family relationships. The judicial process against Margaret and Elijah Caldwell began in 1963, marking the start of one of the most complex and disturbing cases the Mississippi judicial system had ever encountered. The charges included an improper relationship, child neglect, and psychological abuse, terms that seemed inadequate to capture the true nature of the crimes. During the preliminary hearings, it became clear that Elijah was also a victim. Psychiatric evaluations showed a man with the emotional development of a teenager, utterly dependent on his grandmother and incapable of fully comprehending the gravity of his actions. Elijah Caldwell displays clear signs of prolonged psychological manipulation, concluded Dr. Richard Matthews, the forensic psychiatrist appointed by the court. Considering the control Margaret has exercised over him since his youth, his capacity for true consent is highly questionable. The authorities were confronted with an unprecedented ethical and legal dilemma. While public opinion demanded severe punishment, experts contended that the case required a more nuanced approach, one that considered the complex web of mental illness, cultural isolation, and potential genetic factors that contributed to the situation. To protect the identities of the children, the trial was held behind closed doors. Margaret, now 59, remained impassive throughout the entire process, refusing to show remorse or even to acknowledge that anything was wrong with her relationship with her grandson. In her distorted mind, she genuinely believed she was protecting her lineage of her family, explained Dr. Elizabeth Parker, the psychologist who evaluated her. She saw herself as fulfilling a kind of sacred duty to preserve what she termed the pure blood of the Caldwells. National notoriety found the case when the Washington Post published an investigative report titled The Horror in the Mississippi Swamps. The article, while careful to avoid revealing details that could identify the children, exposed the systemic failures that had allowed the situation to persist for so long. How can a family become so completely isolated in the middle of the 20th century? The article questioned. Where were the neighbors, the social services, the local authorities before 4 innocent children were born, condemned to a lifetime of suffering? The issue of community responsibility became a central point in discussions about the case. Many residents of Belwan later admitted they had noticed strange behaviors from the family but had chosen not to interfere, adhering to the unwritten code of privacy that prevailed in rural southern communities. Here in Mississippi, we are taught from a young age not to meddle in the affairs of others, an anonymous resident explained to the Post. Now, I find myself wondering how many other families like the Caldwells are still hidden away in the swamps and mountains. Narrator's voice becomes more emotional. And you, watching this video right now, can you imagine the isolation and the silent terror those children endured? If this story has touched your heart, please type in the comments, "No child deserves to live in darkness." Your comment plays a part in keeping the memory of these victims alive and helps raise awareness about the crucial importance of community vigilance in protecting our most vulnerable. The primary concern for the authorities became the fate of the 4 Caldwell children. Specialists in child development were consulted to decide the best course of action. Separating the siblings risked causing additional trauma, yet keeping them together meant finding an adoptive home prepared to take on 4 children with significant special needs. Dr. Catherine Stevens, a specialist in childhood trauma, worked intensively with the children during this period of transition. Despite all they had been through, they showed a profound connection to one another, she reported. Sarah, in particular, took on the role of protector for her younger brothers, displaying a remarkable resilience. The case set an important precedent for how Mississippi's judicial and social assistance systems would handle similar situations in the future. New policies were implemented to enhance the monitoring of isolated families, and training for social workers was expanded to include the identification of signs of improper relationships. The trial of Margaret and Elijah Caldwell reached its conclusion in September of 1963 with a verdict that reflected the case's unprecedented complexity. Margaret was found guilty on all charges and received a sentence of 30 years in prison without the possibility of parole. Elijah, however, was declared unable to stand trial due to his mental condition and was committed for treatment at a state psychiatric institution. This case represents a failure not just of 2 individuals, but of an entire society that allowed such a horror to occur right under our noses, declared Judge Harold Thompson as he pronounced the sentence. Let it serve as a warning about the dangers of extreme isolation and community indifference. But the true legacy of the Caldwell case was only beginning to unfold as experts worked to better understand the consequences of consanguinity and to provide adequate care for the 4 children. A medical team from the University of Mississippi, under the leadership of Dr. Walter Reynolds, meticulously documented the conditions of the Caldwell children, creating one of the first comprehensive studies on the biological effects of extreme consanguinity in the United States. The children presented a spectrum of anomalies consistent with homozygosity of deleterious recessive genes, Dr. Reynolds explained in his study, published in 1965. Beyond the obvious physical deformities, they all demonstrated varying degrees of cognitive impairment, cardiovascular problems, and a heightened susceptibility to infections. Sarah, the second child, had the least severe condition, with an IQ measured around 65 and less pronounced physical deformities. William, the eldest, suffered from frequent seizures and a progressive impairment of his vision. James struggled with chronic respiratory problems, while the youngest, Thomas, faced the most serious consequences, including a severe cardiac malformation that required multiple surgical interventions. The state of Mississippi faced severe criticism for the system's failure to protect these children. In response, Governor Paul Johnson Jr. established a special task force to reform child protection services, particularly in isolated rural communities. The Caldwell case has exposed systemic failures that we can no longer afford to ignore, the governor stated officially. Every child in Mississippi deserves protection, no matter how remote their home may be. The story of the Caldwell family inspired a generation of social workers, doctors, and researchers to deepen their understanding of the consequences of consanguinity and the importance of early intervention in cases of extreme family isolation. When individuals who are genetically very close have children, the probability that harmful recessive genes will manifest increases dramatically, explained Dr. Mary Williams, a Harvard University geneticist who studied the case. In the Caldwell case, we observed this effect magnified across generations of isolation, resulting in a devastating concentration of deleterious genes. Family records recovered from the swampy property revealed that the Caldwell's isolation did not start with Margaret. It dated back at least 3 generations, with evidence of marriages between cousins as far back as the 1870s. The Caldwells serve as a case study in how geographical isolation can lead directly to genetic isolation, observed Dr. James Peterson, a cultural anthropologist who studied isolated communities in the southern United States. The swamp acted not just as a physical barrier, but as a barrier to the genetic diversity essential for a healthy population. Meanwhile, the 4 Caldwell children faced the immense challenge of integrating into a society from which they had been completely isolated. After spending months in temporary homes, they were eventually adopted by 2 different families. William and Sarah were adopted by a couple who were teachers from Jackson, while James and Thomas were adopted by a family of doctors from Memphis. The adoptive families received specialized training to handle the children's specific needs and were connected to a support network that included specialized doctors, therapists, and educators. These children require not just medical care, but an opportunity to experience a normal childhood filled with love and acceptance, stated Dr. Stevens, who continued to monitor their progress. It is remarkable how, even after years of deprivation, they still possess the capacity to form healthy bonds. Follow-up reports indicated slow but steady progress. Sarah, in particular, flourished in her new environment, developing social skills and even surpassing some of the doctor's initial expectations regarding her cognitive potential. An unexpected twist in the Caldwell case arrived in the autumn of 1978 when Margaret, after 15 years of incarceration, died in the Mississippi State Penitentiary. The autopsy revealed something no one had suspected. Margaret suffered from a rare genetic condition known as mosaic Turner syndrome, a chromosomal anomaly that affects roughly 1 in every 2,500 women born. This discovery cast an entirely new light on the entire case. This condition partially explains how Margaret was able to conceive at such an advanced age, an extremely rare occurrence, and may have contributed to her psychological dysfunctions, commented Dr. Reynolds, who had continued to study the medical aspects of the Caldwell family. The discovery revived academic interest in the case, now viewed from a more compassionate perspective that recognized Margaret not only as a perpetrator but also as a victim of her own biology and cultural isolation. Margaret's death coincided with Sarah Caldwell's graduation from high school, now Sarah Johnson, after her adoption. Defying all initial expectations, Sarah had become a dedicated student, overcoming many of her early limitations through intensive therapy and the unwavering support of her adoptive family. Sarah is a testament to the power of human resilience, her adoptive mother, Elizabeth Johnson, told the Clarion Ledger in an interview. She has transformed a story of horror into a testimony of incredible overcoming. At 22, Sarah made the courageous decision to use her experience to aid other children who were victims of dysfunctional family environments. She enrolled in the social work program at the University of Mississippi, becoming a passionate advocate for the reform of child protection systems. "I don't remember much from my early years," Sarah admitted during a rare public testimony at a 1985 symposium on child protection. "But I carry the scars, both physical and emotional. If my story can help prevent even one other child from enduring the same, then all the suffering will have served a purpose." Sarah's brothers followed different paths. William, whose medical conditions were more severe, remained dependent on specialized care until his premature death at age 26 due to neurological complications. James achieved a semi-independent life with constant support, working in a protected environment and residing in an assisted community. Thomas, the youngest, endured multiple heart surgeries throughout his life but developed a remarkable talent for art, creating paintings that expressed his unique experience. In 1987, nearly a quarter-century after the case was discovered, Elijah Caldwell died in the psychiatric institution where he had spent most of his adult life. His doctors reported that he never fully grasped the nature or consequences of his actions, remaining in many ways with the manipulated mentality of an adolescent. The Caldwell case forces us to question the very boundaries between victim and perpetrator, reflected Dr. Richard Matthews, who had followed Elijah for decades. Elijah was shaped by forces beyond his understanding or control. He was trapped in a cycle of abuse that spanned generations. The Caldwell property in the swamp stood abandoned for years, becoming a kind of haunted site in local folklore. In 1992, county authorities finally demolished the deteriorated structure in a symbolic effort to close this dark chapter of their history. Yet, the legacy of the Caldwell case lives on in the legislative reforms it inspired, in the medical protocols developed to identify signs of consanguinity, and in the heightened awareness of the dangers of extreme isolation. What transpired in those Mississippi swamps in the 60s might feel like a tale from another world, commented Dr. Elizabeth Parker during a 1998 lecture at Harvard University. But cases that are similar, if perhaps less extreme, continue to exist in isolated communities across the nation. Our best tools for prevention remain vigilance and education. Sarah Caldwell Johnson dedicated her professional life to this cause, establishing the New Beginnings Foundation in 1995, a non-profit organization focused on helping children rescued from abusive or dysfunctional family environments. Her unique perspective as both a survivor and a professional brought an invaluable dimension to the field of social work. Every single child deserves the chance to write their own story, free from the mistakes and traumas of the generations that came before them, Sarah declared upon receiving the Mississippi State Humanitarian Award in 2001. We are not defined by our past or our genetics, but by the choices we make once we finally gain the freedom to choose. From the horror and tragedy of the Caldwell case, something positive eventually grew: a deeper understanding of the effects of consanguinity, significant reforms within child protection systems, and, through Sarah, a powerful voice for those who cannot speak for themselves. If you've watched all the way to this point, it's because this story resonates with you. Please leave a comment saying, "I watched until here." This lets me get to know you and identify who truly appreciates the stories on this channel. Don't forget to subscribe so you can access more exclusive cases like this one. Take a moment to like this video and share it with someone you know would also find this impressive story interesting. Every subscription, like, and share supports our mission to continue revealing these obscure secrets of American history that deserve to be told.